Welcome back to Arise Prime Time. I'm Charles Adeniyi Goldwell for his perspective and informed assessment of the news and issues of the day. I'm joined now in the studio by the political commentator, Professor of Communications and Deputy Dean of the Postgraduate School at Bayes University in Abuja, Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. Prof, thank you very much indeed for coming in.
Thank you very much, Charles.
Let's start with the very first conversation we had on the program this evening with Umar Farouk Ibrahim, who is the National Secretary of the Labour Party. We're talking about what's next for the Obidient movement and all the things that have been raised in the media about a crisis of ambiguity, an existential crisis. What do they do next and so on? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think the Obi-Dati Labour Party relationship is an experimental one. And of course, it's going to teach us a lot of things in this country with respect to how to build institutions. The effect that Obi Party that they created on Labour Party could have happened if they joined any other party. They would have created that same effect. So what it means is that there's a dialectical relationship between individuals and institutions. It takes strong individuals to develop institutions. And when we're talking about strong, we're not talking about physical strength. We're talking about strength of character, values, virtues, principles, consistency, focus, and contrast, to the preponderance of shenanigans happening in this country. So we saw it in those two gentlemen, the candidate and his deputy. We saw how they influenced the party. So what is left now is for us to have sustainability, consistency, how the ideology of prudence, the ideology of accountability, of transparency can effectively rub off on the Labour Party. Of course, we know what Labour Party represents ordinarily, but as it really is rubbed off, and if it has rubbed off, is it going to be sustainable? So that's the experiment that we're going to keep looking at now, maybe going forward. We don't know how things are going to go. We're still in the post-election period. We do not know how the court cases will pan out, but in the circumstance, it's just good to see that what will help the Labour Party is for the gentlemen to continue on the edges of the party, and of course ensure that the ideologies, are imbibed, by the Labour Party, ordinarily a party of workers, ordinarily a party of the downtrodden, ordinarily a party of protestation, etc., etc. But it's still there are still some times ahead, and we hope that we'll be able to serve whatever comes ahead of us.
But how do you think the APC with Bola Tinubu's team would react to them going forward? Because, some have suggested that, or questioned whether they expect them to use their power as a political weapon against those opponents, such as the Obidient. Because the Obidient movement is a little perhaps more radical than what you would normally would have. And it's almost like, some have suggested that it might be, not in any kind of, you see what I mean? Not in a particularly punitive way, but using the powers that are available to them to try and neutralize whatever opposition there is.
I don't think they can use any physical power, maybe because they are in power, they're not beginning to oppress them or trying to undermine them, to undo them. We're in a putative democracy. And against that background, it's going to be very, very difficult for maybe a government in power to be openly antagonistic to the opposition, to do things, to browbeat them, to badger them, bring them down. Do not forget that we live in a closed world now. We live in a global environment, where people can easily be repulsed, by your action and inaction. Especially when you wield power, you want to use it against the one that is vulnerable. I don't think they will be that.
Well, to be fair, we have examples of that. When at the end of the NSARS protests, a lot of the people were arrested. Their bank accounts were closed.
Yeah, very unfortunate.
You also had, when the APC took over from the PDP, you had a lot of the same punitive sanctions imposed on a lot of members of the PDP in the name of fighting corruption and all the rest of it. You see what I mean?
The issues are becoming expanded now.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is that there are ways and means of doing things if you want.
Labour Party, they are not in power. They are not controlling power. They are not in the central stage of power. They just managed to control one state and maybe some seats in the National Assembly, some other states in the State House of Assembly. And so it's a party that is growing. It's a party that is fledgling, still trying to find its feet, against the background of his excellent performance. If you look at it, because it's not too long that they came on board, with Peter Obi as their flag bearer, and they came up with this kind of result. So overall, you want to commend them, you want to commend their efforts, and you see them as a party of the future. So because they haven't been in government, you cannot really have too many things against them to say you want to hold against them, and so you want to use it to punish them.
I understand what you mean, but it's not so much the Labour Party, it's also the Obidient movement, and it's a movement that is highly dependent, for example, on social media. And we've seen examples recently of we've seen Twitter banned in Nigeria, we've seen all kinds of attempts to try and limit that space.
We just hope that the Bola Tinubu administration will be very, very careful, will not attempt to smash the opposition, realizing that he too is a product of protestation. Over the years, he had a history of protests, of democratic struggle for democracy. He was in Nadeko, he fought President Obasanjo at different levels, so he has this rebel instinct in him too. So if you have that instinct in you, and you see someone else bringing up those kind of a contrary ideology, it's just noble for you not to try to countermand those kind of things. If you do that, then it means that you've lived a life
noble.
Yeah, it means that you've been living a life of hypocrisy all over the in previous years. So okay, it doesn't get to that.
Yeah, let's move away from that and go to the other topic that we discussed with Professor Tunde Eson. The British faulting Fani Kayode's apparently inciting remarks. Mr. Fani Kayode hitting back and saying the British should stay out of Nigeria's business. Is it really Nigeria's business or his business? I mean, what do you make of all that back and forth?
Yeah, I enjoyed the submissions of Professor Eson, and I also saw where the British, the man that spoke was coming from. I think it reminds me as well of the famous theory of Paul Gilroy, in his book, The Black Atlantic, Modernity and Double Consciousness. And what he's saying in that book is that identity is in a flux, it is permanently mutating, it is gestating. And most of the time, people should not necessarily want to look back, because when matters move, they conflate at a particular point, and they move around, and they develop to an extent that you begin to forget the past. It doesn't matter that it's not to say that you lose your sense of past, know your past, but your past becomes less significant than your present. And that's the point that Professor Eson was trying to highlight about Lagos. Lagos is a potpourri.
Absolutely.
Lagos is a melting pot. Lagos is cosmopolitan. Lagos is a symbol of our togetherness. And Lagos is strategic, not just for the Yorubas, but for the Igbos and the Hausas, for everybody that is Nigerian. The most popular city in Nigeria, cannot be identified, cannot be seen from the prism of one tribe. And that's the point he's making. That's the point that Paul Gilroy also made in his theory, The Black Atlantic. And that's what I think that the British person was trying to say, But again, we sometimes shouldn't be surprised when we see people exchanging words, when we see people in exchanges, it is further to the ability or the desire for people to express themselves. And we cannot stop repeating this. We cannot say this for too many times. The fact is that we're in a democracy and people can be very, very expressive. What matters is how we receive what people say. The weight that a speech gets depends on how you react to it. If you do not react to it in the sense in which the person speaking it meant it, of course it will not carry much weight. So it's a matter of understanding.
I wouldn't have expected anything less. You are a professor of communications, and that's a communications theory.
Thank you.
Prof, thank you very much indeed. And as I said,
pleasure.
Professor Abiodun Adeniyi is a political commentator, professor of communications, and deputy dean of the postgraduate school at Bayes University in Abuja. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me, Charles.
That's it for this edition of Arise Prime Time. Join us again tomorrow. From me and the entire team here in Abuja, bye-bye and thank you for watching.